Hello, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Am I
I'm
being
sorry.
too loud? Sorry.
Yeah. No, you're fine. How's it going?
Good, and you?
I'm chilling. I'm vibing. You know, I'm just here. I'm just doing my thing with my video game. It's pretty cool and having a good time.
Cool.
Keep.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, go ahead.
or no, I don't know. I'm just bantering. So what's up?
Well, first I would like to start off with I haven't interacted with a lot of people in the LGBTQ um whatever else comes after that, I can't remember, sorry.
It depends on who you
So
ask,
if
but yeah.
if I'm like irrational or like if something comes off in the wrong way, just go ahead and let me know. That way, I'm not being disrespectful or anything along
hmm
that nature.
Yeah, no, I got you.
Um,
Just like
cool.
the only thing I'd say is that like if you don't know if certain language is like good or not, it's probably good to just like ask and just like be just conscientious about it. Because like
For
certain
sure.
certain kind of languages, like for example, like the T slur. Um, I'm sure I can say it because I'm not sure if it would be like harmful. Content warning: people who are about to hear, close your ears if you don't want to hear T slur. It's like if you're gonna say like tranny or something like that. Like
Oh, okay.
I don't know. Most people can reasonably expect that like that's something that you probably
Well, for
um
sure. Yeah, I wouldn't say
yeah
anything like that.
yeah. And so like, but if you think that there's like a word that like you don't know about, then just like like you can ask me and we can parse that. But yeah, no, like you're
Cool.
totally fine if you like. I'm here with you.
Great. So, one of the things that I really have an issue with nowadays, and granted, nowadays I'm a pretty young person, so there isn't much to compare it to, but just ever since I would say, Trump got in to office in 2016, I've definitely noticed that it feels like it's more of a in group and out group sort of society that we live in now, and that can be, I feel, extremely dangerous on both ends of the spectrum, whether you're right leaning or left leaning. Like when I was prior Trump,
Mm-hmm.
I was considered a liberal to people that I knew, and then the minute Trump got into office, everyone started calling me like a hardcore conservative.
Hmm.
And so that dynamic and that change, I feel, can be very alienating, especially since, at least personally, my political alignment doesn't necessarily fall into that strict box of, well, this person is just, a hardcore conservative that believes all these things that are discussed on these news channels, et cetera, et cetera. And so
Mm-hmm.
having that kind of dichotomy where it's you're either the extreme right or the extreme left, I find um, really dangerous because
Mm-hmm.
I have certain friends who I would consider in the middle, but they see that as almost as an insult because they also see that as, leaning towards conservative, which they view as like the most evil thing in the world now. And so like that's one thing that I would like to discuss with you is maybe how to bridge that gap or maybe any ideas that you have on that because kind of like I said, I feel alienated on both sides. I try to talk to my friends who previously would hear out my thoughts even if they are more technically right leaning,
Mm-hmm.
and now I'm being completely ignored by them, but then also I'm being ignored by the people I used to agree with because they became significantly more extreme in my opinion.
Yeah. So I mean, like, there's a couple things on this, right? Because like I broadly agree that like I think especially I don't know like sorry, are you talking about like friends that you have like IRL or online primarily? Like, what's
Yeah,
your
no,
experience?
like in real life.
Okay. Um, so there's a couple things. Also, let me ask. So, like, how old are you, and like, what spaces do you occupy where you have your friends? Like, are you a college student? Are you a high school student? Like, what kind of spaces are your friends in mostly?
Yeah, so I'm a grad student right now,
Okay.
master's level, not PhD.
Okay. All right, that's cool. So, like, so even at that point, a lot of your friends are like super radicalized. It's interesting.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, I wouldn't say like extremely. I would just say that it was more of a dynamic that really picked up the pace, probably 2018, 2019. Because even when I entered college,
mhm.
it was like it felt business as usual. You could have certain discussions, and generally speaking, they would be discussions where you would bring your side, other person would bring theirs. You try to find a middle ground. Whereas now it kind of feels like there's certain topics that people just avoid altogether in order to um, not get into a shouting match, essentially.
Sure.
And that's it's been such a weird dynamic because I knew these people prior to, and it was complete behavioral change.
Yeah, so there's like, to me, there's like two main issues that are coming up, right? And I think that like these are hard to sometimes reconcile. Is like the fact that like a lot of political issues are like, there's like two issues that you can get, right? The first is that a lot of them are often centered around like very sensitive political issues. So like, for example, like civil rights, you know, like it's very hard on people when you have a certain issue that affects that directly implicates like a group of people, like for example minority people, like trans issues, right? It's very hard, especially if you are someone who belongs to that category, to sometimes have discussions like even amicably about issues pertaining to that category, if you have to like even somewhat broach the idea that your perception or your understanding of the idea may be misinformed because it directly implicates you, and that might mean that it unfortunately means that like in order to be able to engage with certain ideas, you have to accept that like your understanding of it might possibly be wrong. Not necessarily that it is, but you have to accept the possibility. Otherwise, it's impossible to have any kind of meaningful discussion on the issues, you know?
For sure.
Like a good example is the issue, like talking about like what is a woman, like this whole recent discussion. A big reason why it's very hard to have these discussions is because the issue is very sensitive for a lot of trans people. Because oftentimes a lot of trans people have been told throughout their lives, like, the country is not very trans accepting. Like, it just isn't, you know?
Yeah.
And so a lot of people are constantly subjected to being told that they, you know, are not who they say they are, or they're subjected to like a form of abuse or harassment, that form or the other. And so like, and so it can be very hard to be able to have conversations. Like if you actually want to get at the heart of an issue, like, oh, well, what does it mean to be a woman? Like I actually like, if you're approaching the conversation in good faith, it can be very hard to talk to people who are implicated in that, or who are close to other people who are implicated in that, and kind of share in their kind of sensitivity to the subject matter. You know, someone who wants to be like a really big ally or what have you. It can be really, really hard on people to actually know when people are trying to engage in those questions in good faith. And so it can be really easy for people to push back away from them, and basically like almost ridicule you in like a response, like, oh, what, you're saying that it's possible that self-ID is not the only like isn't like the way that we should handle trans people? Oh, well, you like, you're transphobic. Oh, well, you're being transmed, you're being true scum, even though you've never said any of those things. That's not a consequence of anything that you did necessarily, even though you could have said things that could, you know, that could reasonably lead someone to come to that conclusion. But like the primary thing is like the sensitivity of the subject matter to begin with. So like that's one thing, like that's a big part that probably plays in like some of the experiences. It depends on like the subjects you've been talking about. I don't know what conversations you've been having. But another part of it is the fact that a lot of people will, like a lot of times what happens in politics is that you have issues which have are pretty open and shut as far as like the merits of the issues, but which are framed as like opposing and equal political issues, right? And unfortunately, because a lot of these issues become politicized, it can become really hard to actually engage in good faith with ideas that don't have clear-cut answers. Really good example that we were talking about earlier is like the issue with a lot of like healthcare and trans youth, you know? A lot of concerns that like, I say concerns with very heavy quotations, but I'm playing right now, so I can't do the gesture with my hands. A lot of conservatives will try and currently are introducing legislation that would literally outlaw any medical or mental health kind of support for transgender youth. And usually like the things that they will cite, or the heavy quotations concerns they will cite, are the idea that like, oh, doctors are shoving hormones in the 4-year-olds, or they're giving surgery to the 4-year-olds and cutting off their genitals, right? And parents are manipulating their children into believing that they're things that they're not. When in fact, actually, like medical professionals are taking every reasonable step to make sure that like, you know, first, like children, when they display like symptoms, if parents are knowledgeable, they'll take them to mental health professionals, get the opinion of like a mental health professional on how to be able to proceed. And then usually like if that health professional deems that the child may be trans, then they'll prescribe hormone blockers just to be able to like prevent puberty from happening for a while and give the child more time to be able to come to like an informed decision on their own, to see if like further HRT or like other medical transition would be warranted in the future, right? Like overwhelmingly medical professionals are handling this as safe as possible, and yet it'll often be framed as conservatives and like very dishonestly as if it's an open political issue and as if these other things are happening when they just aren't, or if they are, it's in like one-off anecdotal instances that aren't representative of a larger population. And so when we get into politics, this ends up actually describing a lot of political issues. And so that can have a really polarizing effect because, and this is probably, like, there are probably also equivalents for, like, the right. I think that this, like, personally, that's just not as often the case for me because I don't observe that being the case as often. But that may also be my bias speaking there. But what often happens, at least from a left perspective, is that because oftentimes a lot of political issues are actually open and shut, and people are not like actually engaging in issues with good faith when they are open and shut, it can make it really difficult for those people to meaningfully engage with the opposing party in good faith on any issue, even issues which could, like, may actually require bipartisan and like and like working with people across the aisle because it's a nuanced issue, you know? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I definitely get what you're saying. So when it comes to kind of going back to that part of it being a part of your identity, therefore it can become, I don't want to use dangerous, but maybe difficult to discuss. How would one go about having a conversation that is going to elicit those feelings from my perspective? There are certain topics that I know that I would like to discuss that are going to bring up feelings, and I might just be outright wrong due to ignorance, but without the conversation, it's much harder to become aware of that.
Yeah.
Do you get what I'm saying?
Okay. Oh yeah, totally. I think that like the way that I always address, and like basically all the issues, I'm sorry, like sometimes I can ramble a little bit, so like if I'm not making sense, then like please let me know. The way that I always handle these situations is just to be upfront about things that you don't know or things that you want to make sure that you want from the other person. If you are of the impression that like you want to genuinely talk about an issue, but you think that it might, because of the sensitivity, might harm the other person, I think it's good to just approach the person and just be like, hey, listen, I don't know as much about this issue, and I really want to I really want to like learn more about it. I understand that it's sensitive, and like I totally get if you wouldn't want to, or if you would be in an uncomfortable place to be able to do it. But like I would genuinely want to I just want to learn, like learn more about your experience, and like, you know, about this particular issue, whatever it is. Another way to be able to do that specifically, like a really good example of this is like a couple months ago I spoke with Vera Wild, who is a trans YouTuber who does not experience dysphoria. That was really interesting to me because at that time I had never actually talked to someone with that experience. And so even though we talk about those kind of people online all the time, at least in like trans / kind of left spaces, often those are usually spoken, like people like that are usually spoken about hypothetically, like as an abstract concept. And so for me, I wanted to be able to like put a face to it. And so that was really good because I was able to learn. And so basically, now normally this person wouldn't talk to a lot of people. Like for example, Calvin Guerra is someone who also wanted to talk. Well, they go by they and she pronouns. So I'll just say her. I think Calvin Guerra also wanted to talk to her or someone similar, and she refused in that instance because she knew going into the conversation that effectively it would be, even if not directly stated, like a debate about the validity of her person, you know? Which puts like a really high onus on her, because if Calvin is wrong in that situation, then he just has a wrong opinion, you know? He'll be fine at the end of the day. But if she's wrong, then that's basically her entire personhood on the line, you know? Like that's if she's wrong, then it's basically like, well, her whole identity is invalidated. And so what I did when I approached her was I was like, listen, I don't want to, like, I would really like to talk to you because I just want to learn about this. I'm not going to question or push back. Like, I just want to, like, learn about your experience. And that's the only way that I'm approaching this. And she was really receptive to that. And then I had her on my channel, and we had a really good talk, and I learned a lot, and it was great. So maybe taking some steps like that. The consequence of that is that you kind of have to bite the bullet at the front end, that, like, you're not going to necessarily, like, ask questions that might go to the validity of someone's experience. But I think that's, like, a necessary trade-off in some circumstances, to just, like, be able to learn about someone's personal experience without causing, like, knowing that you're not going to cause them any kind of harm, and affirming in them that you're not going to cause any harm to them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. See, that's the hard one though, for me, because I'm such a, what's a good way? Because of my studies, they force me to think in as objectively a state as possible.
I'm there with you.
And like, and so that can become very strange to me to not pursue that, you know. And then, like,
Yeah.
I completely understand or to my best ability, the idea behind how attacking it can feel.
Right.
But still, to me, and I feel like that's such a hard one, because, you know, to a certain level, I can't empathize that if somebody was doing that to me, in that situation, I would also feel very attacked. But from my perspective, it's still incredibly important to. See, that's a hard one.
Well, can I contribute on this?
Yeah, for sure.
Sure. So, I mean, like, you know, I've also, like, you know, I've done research. Like, obviously, like, we talk, like, I have my online presence, but also, like, I've done research for, like, I did research in undergrad, and, like, I've studied research ethics and all that good stuff. I mean, like, here, you know, there's a conversation about, like, the pursuit of truth, but also, like, when we're talking about, like, doing research or pursuing truth, you know, we also have there's always a conversation, or there should always be a conversation about, like, the ethics with which you pursue research, right? And there are certain lines that we draw when pursuing truth in terms of, like, ethics and, like, possible harm that could be caused to the communities that we study. For example, like, one of the best people in terms of, like, literature and understanding the validity of trans people in history is, I believe, like, I'm trying to remember his first name, is Dr. Money. I believe did a lot of studies back, I think it was like the 70s. It was back like 1900s, like later 1900s. And like tons of really, really awesome, or I say awesome, tons of really informative literature. I cited some of it in my research doc, or at least like expounding literature on that research. And basically like all of that. But also, even though it's really good information as far as being able to understand trans people, a lot of the studies that he ran were not exactly kind ethically to the people that were being studied, you know? Like, I'm pretty sure one of the studies was, like, basically, like, taking a cis person and, like, effectively taking them from birth and, like, essentially, like, you take an AMAB person and then, like, do a procedure so then they have, like, a neo-vagina,
But,
and then
hold on, I don't mean to interrupt, but can you tell me what that means?
Oh, sorry, or AMAB? Oh, assigned male at birth person.
Okay.
Yeah, so, like, someone with a penis, testicles, all that. And
Gotcha.
so, like, you have this person, so, like, he took, like, an AMAB person, and essentially performed surgery, gave this person a neo-vagina, and then told the parents, hey, listen, you all know what's up. Give this person, like you're going to raise this person as a girl, and you're going to give this person effectively HRT at appropriate times, and you're not going to tell her, but you're going to go about and you're going to do this and just raise this person as a girl. And what they found out was that as this person grew up, got massive amounts of dysphoria. Massive amounts of dysphoria. Or at least this is the best that I can remember the literature. If I'm citing it wrong, then chat will yell at me, and I will feel bad. But, like, obviously, if we're looking at this situation, we can be able to get a lot of, like, really cool inferences, because, like, that's an example of showing that, like, for example, I've talked a lot about gender and, like, how there's, like, some kind of, like, intrinsic feeling that someone can have that usually informs, like, their identity or their gender. Like, that's a study which has, like, a really good piece of evidence to be able to show that. And so, like, that's, like, a good example of pursuing truth, but it's not exactly treating the person ethically either. you know, and we shouldn't do it. Like, we have the information now, so it's like we already got it, so we might as well not waste it, but we shouldn't obviously pursue research like that in the future. And so here, right, like when we're talking about pursuing truth in terms of like asking people with vulnerable backgrounds about like issues that are pertinent to them, like, you know, we can take steps to be able to like acquire as much info as possible, but we probably do want to draw certain lines to make sure that we aren't causing harm to people either, because I think that's what's required to be an ethical researcher or pursuer of truth or whatever you want to say. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. No, I definitely agree. When it comes to, certain topics like you're talking about with, that study, I find that, first off, absolutely insane. That something like that could even happen. And I think it's, like, I definitely appreciate the example. I really hope it doesn't have to be that extreme to have conversations like that.
Well, yeah, exactly. I think that's like an extreme example. That's an extreme hypothetical. But I mean, like, it's the same idea, right? Like, we want to make sure that, like, if we're having conversations with people about vulnerable kinds of experiences, that, like, we want to make sure that we're taking ethical steps so that we're not causing harm to these people. Like, that's the main thing.
For sure.
And even if that means that we have to, like, accept certain kinds of boundaries to the kinds of questions that we ask, or the kind of places that we can go in a conversation, I think it's worth it because, like, effectively you're getting as much information as you're able to without crossing an ethical line.
For sure.
Yeah. And so, like, and so when we bring it back to, like, the question of, like, people who you're close to, left-leaningly, a lot of people on the left probably come from those kind of experiences. I'm not sure how many people on the right are going to be like that. I don't know. So, like, what's your experience? Like, let me tell you, because you said that a lot of people on the right, or at least this is what I remember you saying, that a lot of people who you knew who are more conservative don't have as much of a relationship with you. Can I ask you about, like, what in particular you experienced in regards to them?
In the sense of, like, being cast out's a bad way to say it, but effectively.
Yeah. Well, yeah, like not having as close a relationship with them now as you did at some point prior.
Yeah, so, like, I have certain family that we got along pretty well, but we got to the point now where there are just certain topics that you don't bring up whatsoever because...
Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm hearing this, and I have a very similar experience with my family, but go on.
Yeah, I mean, it just effectively felt like you can't talk about it because then it's just going to lead to an overwhelming amount of emotions and this is partially my issue, I view as extremely objective. I try to remove myself as emotionally as possible. Granted, okay, I should change that actually. I've been trying to put myself back into situations emotionally because I think that there's like two parts to discussions. You have the emotional and you have the objective.
I mean, yeah, sure. That's a way to parse it out.
Well, I think, like, empathetically, the only way to truly understand the way that other people are trying to communicate to you is to also understand the emotions behind them. That's something that I've been trying to work on a lot, is to understand how they are intending to be heard versus how I'm hearing them.
I think that's
And
fair.
I think that emotion plays a role in that.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And so that's one of the big issues that I run into, is that there are just certain topics that bring upon such an emotional response that you can't even get past, the first couple sentences to, the nuance where I feel most people actually reside.
Yeah. So here's the thing about it. And I don't know, like, what you're, like, I have a very similar experience with my family. Insofar as, like, like, I come from not like a super conservative family, but a family that's much more conservative than me. Like, they would identify themselves as, like, socially progressive but economically conservative. But then what they don't tell you is that they actually, exist in, like, a relatively socially conservative environment. So really, in the grand scheme of things, they're probably just like conservative. Not like super conservative. Like, they're the kind of people who you would ask, like, hey, do you think racism is bad? And they would be like, yeah, of course racism is bad, but they would have a different definition of what racism is than you do,
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, you can run into problems there. But, like, you know, there's a lot of times when I go home, and sometimes people have like, you know, just kind of like a more like lukewarm conservative point of view where it's like it doesn't really matter that all that much. But like, there's a cousin I have, and like his mom, or my aunt, who have been listening to a lot of super far right people on radio. I don't even fucking know who they are. I just remembered looking them up when I heard about them, and it's like they had apparently had like super like white nationalist takes and were super misogynistic, and I was like, fuck, my cousin might be becoming a white nationalist. Not great. Cringe. Yeah. Massive cringe. And so it's a very hard situation to be in, because like, I mean, that's like a more extreme example, you know. I'm not saying that like everyone who's like super far, or everyone who's conservative is going to end up like that, right? But like, you know, there's different ways to handle those environments, because like essentially it's a really weird environment to be in, because like not only do I have to like watch what I say around the people who are just kind of like the diet conservatives, but I also have to like especially watch what I say around my family members who like the ones who are listening to that super far right talker, because like I especially don't want like around them, like I'm especially careful to not say something that will like set them off or whatever. The way that generally I don't know, like I still don't have a great answer for this. The way that I generally approach those situations is just to like, I mean, normally I don't bring up the like any issues, because like, I don't know, like I do a lot of debate, like technically, like I've gotten into enough conversations with people on these issues to know that like it's really hard for them to have conversations about oh fuck, don't want to die. It's, I don't know, it's really hard to have conversations with people about, like, I'm able to sit on here and talk about pretty serious issues and maintain a pretty good vibe most of the time, you know? Like, I can sit up here and I can, like, talk about super, like, in-depth issues and not feel, like, super personally or morally implicated, or generally unless the other person, like, does something to attack me personally, right? But, like, a lot of people just are not like that, you know? And I hate to be the one to say it, but, like, just a lot of people are not like that. And it's very hard to have conversations about super sensitive subjects, even with people who aren't necessarily implicated, but who feel like they're implicated. And so, like, with my family members, usually I just make it a prudential rule to not, to not talk about certain subjects around them. And usually what I try to do is I just try to maintain a good relationship with them, so that if they ever get into a place where they ask me for my opinion on something, like, not where I'm telling them what to think, but rather, like, where they are asking me for my genuine opinion on a certain subject and are looking to me to be like the basis for their opinion, then I can be able to reasonably give it to them and hopefully like help them out a little bit. With people in those kind of positions, it's like usually the thing that changes their mind is not often being proven wrong in the free marketplace of ideas. It's usually just like being close to them. I don't know if that's like a great answer for you, because I don't know what the situation is between you and your friends, and it's really hard to like develop a relationship with them. But I guess that my best advice would be to just like reach out to them and be like, hey, listen, I just want you to know that like I do care about you as a person. I would like for us to be able to be friends. You don't, obviously, like, you don't have to do anything with that, but if you ever want to reach out, then I'm here, and I'll be free to like listen or hang or whatever. Like, I'm like, you're my friend, I care about you. And then essentially the ball is in their court, you know? And hopefully they will. I've done a lot of the same with friends of mine over the course of the years, both who are conservative and who come from other backgrounds. Some people will probably never respond to you, and some people will go on through their lives and they'll take their own paths or whatever. But sometimes people will respond, and you know, if they reach out to you and they want to talk to you, then there can be a really cool opportunity to be able to like help them a little bit along, in whatever way. I'm sorry, I ramble a lot. I am terribly,
no, you're fine. I mean, I came to hear your opinion, so
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, like, I feel bad, but I'm glad that was helpful. But go ahead. So you wanted to ask a question?
Well, I was just gonna say, I think that's one of the big issues that I run into as well when it comes to, not necessarily learning, but I guess like, how do you say that? I guess just establishing that relationship, trying to learn more, et cetera, et cetera. It's that weird situation where it's most helpful and going to be the quickest to learn from the people closest to you. But it's also weird to put the pressure on the person to basically act as the, epitome of a certain part of them, where they have to be the principal, speaker on this specific topic.
Oh,
Like,
gotcha.
it would be weird to me if somebody came to me and was like, "Tell me what a man is." I'm
Yeah.
like, that's
Um,
kind of weird. I mean, I can tell you my opinion of that, but
yeah.
that's one of those things that I have a hard time, uh, not dealing with. But like, I guess I do kind of feel bad about prodding sometimes, because then it's, again, that same situation where I'm essentially forcing the responsibility on you to, teach me.
Right. So generally the way that I would see that is like, so there's like a couple things, right? So first, like a lot of this can probably be dealt with by just, like by approaching people in the same way that we discussed earlier, just being like, considerate and being like, hey, I'm just interested in learning about this. I don't know as much. If you would be willing to help me, then that's fine. If not, I totally get it. Like being considerate in that sort of way can probably take you a long ways. But also like the mindset with which you go into those kind of conversations, I think it's always important to recognize that like unless you're talking to someone who has like some degree of like study in the field that you're asking about, like with me, it's a little weird because I'm not gonna sit here and say I'm an expert or especially like a primary expert, but I mean like there is a weird question of like, all right, have I done enough research to approach the level of like a quasi expert or like a secondary expert? I mean, it's,
Hmm.
like I'm literally like I have the head researcher for the National Center for Trans Equality in my Discord, who I talk to regularly. Like, the line is certainly at least getting blurry. And so, like, when you ask me about trans issues, like, I'm speaking probably from more than just my own personal anecdotal experience. Like, I'm at least speaking to some authoritative degree. Maybe not like as high as like someone who has like a formal degree or a doctorate in this area, but like more than the average person. But like when you're talking to someone who you're asking about like an issue that is pertinent to their experience or their categorization, like it's always good to just remember that unless they have like some kind of requisite like some degree of expertise in the area, maybe they study it for as part of their schooling or like part of their master's, like you mentioned that you're in a master's program, maybe they study it there, or maybe they just study as a hobby, kind of like how I do with this. Like I'm a law student. They don't teach me any of this shit in law school. Like then you can ask probably a bit more of like looking for a bit more of like an authoritative opinion. But otherwise, you want to make sure that you're just asking you're just asking for like someone's individual anecdotal experience, right? And that's not
For
meaningless.
sure.
Yeah, and that's not like meaningless. That can have meaning. It's just a matter of weight, right? You probably don't want to look at it as like something to justify your opinion on something, like as a way to say that like
Hmm.
because this happened to this person, this must be the experience of the whole category or even the majority. But rather like, if you already have like a knowledge of some kind of phenomenon, it can be really useful to explain that phenomenon, right? Like if you, for example, like it's like it is like there is a phenomenon, for example, of like how trans people are disproportionately forced to do sex work, because pursuant to the discussion that we had earlier, a lot of trans people are unable to afford like medical transition, and so that's like one of the only ways to be able to afford it, especially if you come from a relatively poor background. So like if you have that kind of an experience, like that knowledge can be supplemented with like a conversation with someone who's trans who does sex work, and you can just be like, hey, so can you explain to me like some of your experience? And that can be really informative, like you can learn a lot about like what that actually looks like practically in the life of a real person, and that can be really useful. It's just like a different way to use that knowledge, and so it's just important to go into those conversations with that understanding that like you might not be asking for like proof of like a larger phenomenon, but like you can get something out of it. It's just like you need to understand what you're able to get out of it.
For sure. Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,